Hello everybody and welcome to Amphlett Reviews. Today we're doing a double bill Hong Kong review for my concluding chapter of the IP Man franchise overview. I've been really enjoying doing these videos and kind of discussing my thoughts and opinions on the entire franchise. This video will focus on Master of Z, the Legend of the IP Man, which is a spin-off from IP Man 3, and of course IP Man 4, the finale, which is the concluding chapter of the four-part series of his kind of, the character's kind of story arc. And just kind of want to discuss the good, the bad, about both these movies in a double review and wrap it up. So let's talk about both these movies in great detail and break down my thoughts and opinions. And please comment down below, join the discussion. I'd love to have a deeper conversation about both these films. So let's dive into first, Master of Z, the Legend of the IP. Master of Z, the Legend of the IP Man. This is 3 years after IP Man 3. This serves as a spin-off / sequel to that franchise with various kind of characters coming from that movie. It's from the director also of Tai Chi Master, Iron Monkey, and Drunken Master. Hey. This movie serves as a spin-off / sequel to the events of IP Man 3. This movie follows the anti-hero character from the events of the last movie. I'm referred to him as Master Z just for argument's sake. I can't pronounce the actor's name, but he was the kind of supporting character in the third IP Man movie. You follow his journey as the kind of doing a bit of a thief. He also wants to learn Wing Chun, wants to be the Wing Chun master. He did face IP Man at the end of the third movie, did lost that battle, but down to one move. But he has moved to a new city now, restart, open a store with his son, and he's kind of like trying to rebuild his life and kind of rediscover his kind of roots and that kind of classic kind of hero's journey. But of course, in typical kind of Hong Kong fashion, he gets involved with a bunch of characters that are kind of in between an American kind of drug lord and kind of, Hong Kong kind of tryouts, which is a lot of drama, a lot of scenarios going on with these characters. And he gets involved with them and he has to help them while kind of helping himself and kind of rediscovering who he is as a character. Is he a villain? Is he a hero? Master of Z, I think, is just a fine, okay kind of spin-off, kind of sequel / movie. It's definitely not the worst offender compared to the two. Now, Master of Z and IP Man 4 both share very similar kind of issues I have with both movies in terms of structure, in terms of storyline, in terms of overpacking in its typical kind of modern Hong Kong kind of fashion from what I've been seeing with the kind of modern Hong Kong movies. This one I definitely prefer over IP Man 4, which I'll get into later on. I think the idea itself of a spin-off of the IP Man universe I think is fantastic, and exploring a character that we got to know quite well in the third movie I think is great. And having been a slightly more cheaper kind of movie, straight to DVD, such a streaming service type thing, there's potential there. I do feel this movie would have worked better as a TV series, a 6-part series. I think he would have fleshed out a lot of the problems I have with the movie itself, and I think it would have been a good opportunity to do maybe an anthology series of characters that we kind of got to know within the last two movies with IP Man 1 and 2 as well. A cheaper movie, getting a recognisable star with a few other kind of recognisable characters, and Michelle Yeung's in this film. You've got Dave Bautista, which is in this film, so it's a pretty decent cast of actors with a kind of the main protagonist from the IP Man 3. So you've got a connected tissue right there. So let's break down Master of Z. Both of these movies are basically the equivalent of IKEA in the sense, you get your box, you get your instructions, you assemble it together, you put it in the corner, and you forget about it. What's the challenging about that? And I'm saying a little bit harsher because most of the kind of Hong Kong cinema movies I've seen now, especially with a lot of the awful Jackie Chan modern take movies, they're just all the same. Overblown CGI films, overly acted, overstuffed, just very easy sets kind of thing. Not much over in terms of the fight sequences. They're kind of very minuscule, they're very kind of minimal kind of thing. They're not really that main focus anymore. I would happily take a 70s, low way kind of film that has the typical kind of revenge storyline because it has charm, it has that kind of old school kind of fashion, the fights feel real authentic, and you get a really fun villain, most of the time anyway, and a pretty decent, somewhat serviceable story. I do feel there's a lot of opportunity to kind of really explore the kind of the IP Man universe, kind of cinematic universe as you will. Why isn't there a Hong Kong cinematic universe? Am I the only one thinking this? My issues with Master of Z fall within the kind of the modern kind of Hong Kong cinema approach anyway in general, in terms of fight sequences that are not very satisfying. They're very kind of easily kind of put together. They're not really much work behind them. Granted, this is better than some of the other ones I have seen. You've got a really decent director behind the camera with this movie, so he does a decent job in presenting some of the sequences, but they are quite forgettable. They are quite serviceable. There's only about maybe 2 sequences, I think, in this entire movie that I actually really enjoyed, which is the kind of the fight between Tony Jarvis and the fight sequence between Dave Bautista at the very end of the film. It's a 2-hour movie, and there's only 2 fight sequences that I actually remember compared to the entire film. For me, this film has a lot of structure issues in terms of the editing, in terms of the story, in terms of where it goes, and what makes a satisfying kind of Hong Kong movie, what makes the IP Man movies different compared to some of the other ones. And the reason why I like IP Man 1 to 3 a lot is because I'm invested in the main character, and his supporting characters around him, his supporting character of his family, his villain characters, even some of his helpers in the film are really interesting, and you get behind the story because he is the story driver, and you're fully committed with that journey because he's going through the events with him. I mentioned in IP Man 3 that one of the reasons I like that movie, despite some of the issues I have with it, is that every fight sequence is emotional filled. You know, every sequence he fights for, his son gets kidnapped, you know, he friends his wife, there's an elevator fight scene, the ending fight scene is an honor kind of last hoorah kind of thing from his wife's kind of allowing him to go ahead and fight this kind of character. Every fight sequence fills the story and it fills the kind of the character's motivation within that film. So every fight sequences in that film is so rememberable and so interesting and so well presented, and it really highlights how good, you know, Donnie Yen is as a performer, as an actor, and as a story-driven movie. It really plays into the heartstrings and the overall heart of IP Man 3. Master Z tries to do similar things but doesn't come across it. I'm going to break down why this movie is got quite a few issues in terms of structure, editing, pacing, story, and fight sequences, and why it all kind of crumbles within the kind of the middle parts of the film. So let's break down Master Z. So first part of this idea of the story, we have Master Z and the kid. So we have an established character, a character we're invested in, a character we'd like to see more of from IP Man 3 and his kind of character journey. He's an anti-hero character, someone who is struggled, very similar to kind of the IP Man himself, and he wants to be kind of big, he wants to be known, he wants to be the Wing Chun master, and he has to kind of deal with the defeat of the last movie and support his kid, and he does the right thing. He moves to town, he opens a store kind of thing, and he's trying to do the right thing for his kid and try and refine and repurpose himself within the movie. And the first 35 minutes, I would say, of this film is really about him and his kind of struggles and his kind of relationship with his kid, which is very adorable and it's very interesting, it's very compelling. And of course he gets involved with the secondary kind of plot of the film, which is the victim characters, which is the characters in between what's going on with the villains, which you've got one end, you've got the triad kind of wars with Michelle Yeoh, and then the third one, the kind of secondary villain character, and the fourth storyline in the movie, which is the American kind of drug lord, which is Dave Bautista in the film. And he gets involved within all 3 kind of storylines. And the problem is with the film is it jam-packs all 4 storylines into one movie. Now, instead of focusing on the main character that we're here to see and the character that we kind of know introduced to this world, you know, he takes a back seat. After the first 35 minutes, we kind of establish these new characters now, these supporting characters. You know, you've got like a nightclub owner, you've got a drug user kind of thing, and you get a couple of nice sequences, a couple of nice drama sequences and moments and reflections kind of thing of what's going on. But the film takes too much of a downtime, and it just kind of becomes a little bit boring, if I'm being honest. It kind of, you know, distracts away from our main character to a point where I actually forgot, you know, this is a story about him in a sense. You know, if this was meant to be more of an ensemble film, then granted, that's fine, because other movies have done that. Justice League has done that. The Raid 2 has done that. You can do it. Quentin Tarantino, the master of ensemble casts and storylines, can do it, but you have to do it in a very careful way kind of thing that works with all the characters and makes it engaging and makes it interesting. And when I'm losing focus on characters that I've never been explored before and I don't really care about what's going on with them, then I'm losing my attention is losing. And on top of that, you've got a lot of kind of melodrama throughout the entire film. There's not many action sequences. It kind of plays a really strong hand for the first 35 minutes with establishing the character, his relationship with his son. You get a pretty okay fight sequence kind of thing. You get a great sequence later on with Tyree Jarvis kind of thing, which is a great sequence there, one of the best fight scenes of the entire film. And then it kind of just its budget kind of kicks in, kind of thing. Its producers saying, you got to say the rest for the end of the film, and it kind of plays its downtime. It kind of plays. It's kind of like, okay, we need to chill. We need to establish all this other stuff going on in the film, and that becomes an issue for me, kind of thing. And the main character becomes a backseat driver to the other characters, and the new supporting characters, the victims, and the kind of in between. I don't really care, if I'm being honest. They're not well fleshed out. I don't think I really remember who their names were. Our part 3, in a sense, is the villain characters. Now you've got the triads kind of thing, which is the head of it now is Michelle Yeoh, which is really established, awesome kind of actress. She's a really kick-ass fighter, and she has her moments in the film, and she's a really good actress in the film, and she does a really good job presenting that side of the story. Now her motivation in the film is getting her kind of tryout kind of mob kind of sense, gangsters as legit. She wants to go full legit. No more crime, no more stealing, no more killing, and kind of, out with the old ways, in with the new, and kind of build a relationship, build about legacy, which the whole film is about legacy. Everyone wants to have their legacy within the world of kind of the 1950s kind of, Hong Kong, in that sense. And obviously you got some other characters in the film that don't agree with it kind of thing. They like stealing, they like killing, they like doing what they want to do kind of thing, intimidating people. And of course you've got the dipshit son of Michelle Yeoh, who basically wants his fill, who wants what's owed to him. Hey, my dad did it, his granddad did it, why can't I steal, why can't I kill, why can't I make money and do these kind of stuff? Typical kind of, snotty kid bullshit kind of thing, which is fine because it does play to fun, but this character plays a major part of the entire film. That storyline impacts the entire film, and it follows to our kind of victim character, our supporting characters, that falls into our kind of secondary kind of American drug lord character, Dave Bautista, which is a character which has established himself as a nice community guy. He opens a restaurant, but behind the scenes he is a very nasty, vicious drug dealer that's making a lot of money, and obviously got people in his back pocket. You've got typical kind of greedy, nasty British officers that are on the take, of course, kind of thing. Really funny to see. And you've got a lot of storyline, you've got a lot of plot points going on, and each character has to intertwine with each other kind of thing. And the dipshit son starts to do things with the main characters, and then obviously you got our kind of main kind of Master Z character that's kind of falling into that. And as you can tell, it all kind of overlaps and overfalls each other, and the film is 2 hours long, and it's filling in so much time to try and establish these characters so well and flesh them out so well, but also why it's all connected and why everyone gets involved with each other. And this would be fine. It's not terribly well, it's not absolute terrible. It's actually not too bad overall. But I do think there is a disconnect, and I think the focus of the film is a bit messy. When the main character that you're focusing, you're invested in, is our kind of Master Z character with his son, his kind of hero arc. This is put aside to two main villain groups and a bunch of supporting characters that honestly you're not invested in. At least my opinion anyway, kind of thing. If you are invested in these kind of sort of ideas, fair enough, kind of thing. And it drags its heels. It takes too much time to kind of get past those points. And then of course it builds up to the finale act where characters have died and people are responsible for various kind of deaths kind of thing. And then obviously you get a pretty decent fight sequence at the end with our Master Z and Dave Bautista, which is arguably the best fight sequence in the entire film because it has emotional weight behind it. It takes him the entire movie to kind of break out his kind of self-destructive kind of nature of the film and actually stand up for something that is good. He has seen too much of his friends or kind of supporting characters die in the film or been victim of these kind of two rival gangs in a sense, and he is taking matters in his own hands. And it's actually a good sequence, a good fight sequence, because one, it is a cheaper film for one, so Dave Bautista is taking those hits, he's taking those punches, and so is our kind of main protagonist character, which is great to see. It's an actual fight that has weight, that has a well balanced kind of structure to it, and you can tell they invest the most time and effort in that one last fight sequence, which is the best sequence of the entire film. But unfortunately, it is the last half an hour of the film, which is really disappointing because by that point, I'm on the verge of, should I turn it off, should I fast forward? But no, you stick with it and you get a decent fight sequence at the end. I think the director did a decent job for what he could with the budget. I think for a spin-off of a really popular kind of IP Man franchise, I think it could have been far worse. I think the potential to do more, I think could have been really beneficial if it was an anthology type series, a 6-part series. You could have really fleshed out these problems with the story, with the structure, with the fighting. I think cramming all these ideas, all these stories, all these characters into a 2-hour movie, which they don't always get fully developed, and things get missed out on characters get backseat, especially our main protagonist. It comes across a little messy, and it definitely shows its kind of cheap value. When you're bored and when you're not interested, you start to see other problems. You start to see sound problems, you start to see editing problems, pacing issues kind of thing. And the main trilogy of cast are kind of the two villain characters and our main protagonist is well performed. I think the performances are pretty decent. Overall, I think Master of Z is a serviceable Hong Kong cinema experience. It's definitely not the worst kind of movie out there for sure. I think it's a pretty decent, somewhat kind of spin-off slash sequel. I think it's definitely worth a watch, but my opinion is I watched it on Netflix for free. I would not watch it again. I would not think about it again. I'm only talking about it now for the service of this review, and I haven't watched it since, and I don't think I ever will. It's a very disposable, very one-off kind of movie. That's not terrible, it's not great, and it has a lot of issues. Next up, let's talk about IP Man, the final chapter. Let's finish it! And last but not least, we have IP Man 4, the finale. The last movie came out in 2019 from the same director as the first 3 movies, the final entry, the concluding chapter, etc, etc. It's only recently finished, like what, 2 years ago kind of thing. Crazy to think how much I catched up and how much this kind of franchise has had massive gaps in between each movie. 1 and 2 are quite close together. 3 and 4 were about a good 4 years in between. So these movies definitely do take a bit of time to make, and there definitely is effort, there definitely is a lot of consideration with the kind of the scripts, the ideas, and I think, you know, that's what makes these movies kind of event movies for me in a sense. And there's a reason why this film did so well in the box office, being it's a final chapter of Donnie Yen. It is a kind of traditional kind of classic kind of tale of, you know, good versus evil with kind of Hong Kong cinema. You don't really get that much in kind of modern Hong Kong movies. And it went up against Star Wars and did quite well. It beat Star Wars for a couple of weeks in the box office. Incredible kind of potential for finale chapter. He's going to kind of, you know, the Western kind of approach. He's going to Los Angeles in 1950s, late 60s kind of thing. He's meeting Bruce Lee, he's meeting kind of various other characters and so, you know, supporting characters. And you would think the potential for IP Man 4 is really, really fantastic, and the foundation for what they could build for a final chapter is so much. They can take this anywhere, they can do anything, and they can make the stakes really high, and they can make the emotional impact very satisfying. Unfortunately, this is not the case with IP Man 4. This was a very disappointing concluding chapter. It almost feels like a tacked on, a cash grab, you know, one last kind of just make some money before we go kind of thing. I love the first 3 IP Man movies. I think the first 3 are really strong, despite some issues I have with IP Man 3, which I said in my review, and in this one. This 4th movie does not feel like the same franchise. It feels like such a disconnect with the other 3 in terms of story, in terms of the journey, in terms of the fight sequences, in terms of what is it actually adding for a finale concluding chapter to this arc. Not very much. And I'm going to go into why, into the breakdown of IP Man 4, the final chapter. So IP Man 4, the storyline follows kind of the IP Man who obviously is in Hong Kong. It's a couple of years after his wife's death. He's passed away. He's kind of got a strange relationship with his son. His son wants to kind of learn Wing Chun. He won't allow that. He wants to get his son to kind of like a high-end school. He wants to become a doctor. So he has an opportunity to go to Los Angeles in like 1950s, 1960s, I believe, to meet not only Bruce Lee, his student, who's doing quite well and about to make some movies kind of thing, but also get his son into kind of Western kind of schools. He has to meet a grandmaster, who is the only person that can actually get him into kind of that kind of school. Now, obviously during the kind of late 50s, 60s kind of thing, foreign exchange kind of, you know, students, people who were learning abroad, this was kind of a relatively new thing kind of thing. It wasn't really done, though actually it's very carefully done. You've got very obvious, you know, on the nose kind of, you know, 60s kind of racism in this film. You've got very over the top kind of villain characters which spend way too much time, overstay their welcome in this film way too much, which tries to be a bit of a throwback to the older villains but doesn't quite work, comes across hammy, cheesy, dated, and doesn't fit the tone of the film. You've got a lot of supporting characters, you've got a lot of crammed in beefy stuff within a 2-hour movie, and this is a worse offender and has worse issues than I had with Master of Z. At least with Master of Z, it had an overall point to it by the end kind of thing. You have a sense of a journey. This had a higher budget film, and it definitely wastes its potential far more than that film did. One, we have the IP Man and his son storyline. So let's talk about this. One of the things I like about the IP Man franchise 1 to 3 is that the relationship between his wife and him you know, a lot of his decisions, a lot of his kind of fight sequences, a lot of his motivation is bound to his family, his pride, his kind of art form, his Wing Chun, his peaceful nature, kind of his goodwill, helping nature kind of thing in the film, which is fantastic, and his country. He loves his country, which is fantastic. But it's not over patriotic. It's not over kind of done. He's just someone who is that kind of inner peace, that kind of inner moral. For someone who is got so much kind of inner peace within him, and he's got a family who is loved, who's respected, and wants to help people, you piss him off, he will kill you. And that is demonstrated in that first movie 100%.
Oh my God!
All the fight sequences, for one anyway, I don't have an emotional feel, don't have an emotional connection, they don't have any kind of weight to them. At least with Master of Z, you had 2 fight sequences that were emotional filled. Fight sequences in this film were involving IP Man just feel just kind of fluffy. You know, the nice sequences, and you know, Donnie Yen and the supporting characters do a good job of crafting some interesting kind of fight sequences with kind of objects and the kind of wire work kind of thing, and there's some nice ones here and there, but they have no emotional weight to them. They have 0 emotional weight to them. They just feel like, okay, we have to fight now, so let's just fight. You know, he fights the grandmaster, and like, it kind of feels nice and charming a little bit, but bit pointless, a bit disposable. You have kind of like a mini tournament, kind of outside kind of fight sequence, which is okay, and then you have the main boss fight sequence at the end with our kind of, you know, over the top kind of military bad guy, over the top character, played by Scott Ankins, which is just kind of boring, if I'm being absolutely honest. I didn't really care from by that point, and I really hard to believe that this character almost got his ass kicked to a point in that final fight where, compared to the first 3, he was, you know, very calculated, very smart. He was tactical with his kind of position, his movements. He was always calculating his kind of opponents, like a Terminator. Like I said, I don't really remember much of the fight sequences in the film, and that is down to kind of the typical kind of modern Hong Kong kind of cinema kind of fighting.
Today! No, too cold and sterile. Where's the heart?
Now, one of the biggest sins this film doesn't do is follow its main biggest potential and wasted potential. It should have been a father and son bonding trip. Who is grieving from his mom, who wants to be close to his father, use Wing Chun as a kind of like a coping mechanism, but also kind of a healing tool. I think that's an interesting kind of plot point. I was like, okay, let's see where they take it. In the film, they don't take it anywhere. It's just kind of in the film, it sporadically kind of shows scenes back at Hong Kong, and he's kind of pissed off and he's angry. And then by the end of the film, after a 2-hour plus movie, he comes back home and sort of makes up with his son and goes, okay, I guess you're right, son. I guess you can learn Wing Chun. You know, where's the connection? Where's the emotional investment in this film? It's a 2-hour plus movie, and his son is barely in the film, and when he does come home to Hong Kong, his son doesn't want to speak to him. So there's an instant disconnect. Or at least bring the son with him to Los Angeles. One, establish a new kind of culture, Western kind of approach. The son can learn about his kind of students. Bruce Lee is a good plot point for that in a sense. You know, his son can learn about, you know, the honor about being the IP man, the legacy of the character, how people kind of see him, want to be him, want to face him, and you can see that relationship between the character of the IP man, the grandmaster, and his father, and he can understand both sides of the coin. You know, the very early kind of on the nose 60s kind of racism that could have been explored. You could have had a sequence where the son went to a school for the day kind of thing and kind of spoke to other students kind of thing, but got bullied, like happens in the film anyway. Emotional, really satisfying concluding chapter with his son. By the end of the film, what you could have done is the son could have chosen the path he wants to take. He could have said, I'll do both, or I want to do one or the other kind of thing. You could have had a really satisfying conclusion and a kind of a healing journey for both these characters, because they both lost someone so dear to them. And I think this could have made a really fantastic concluding chapter and completed that kind of story arc so well. And we come to the second issue of the storyline of the film, and the kind of the major kind of plot point within the film is the kind of Western Grandmaster and his daughter. Now, the Western Grandmaster in the film, which I can't remember his name exactly, is someone who allows people to get into the schools, to get into kind of Western schools. He is someone who is approved all of it. If you don't get approved from him, you're not getting anywhere in a sense. So he's pretty pissed off because Bruce Lee is going out there teaching everyone the ways of Wing Chun. He thinks there should be an internal thing, they shouldn't be explored. IP Man disagrees. He thinks, you know, it's a celebration of the culture, celebration of the art. Why should we restrict it to kind of like a people or culture? And it's good morals, good ideas kind of thing. He's pissed off. He doesn't like that. He wants things the old-fashioned way. He's got a daughter which is raised in the kind of the American schools. She wants to become a cheerleader, and he's trying to teach her the ways of Wing Chun. And obviously, it's that kind of typical old versus new and kind of finding a way to balance in the middle kind of thing. And you've got the daughter storyline, which is quite heavy in the film. Now, you follow her kind of journey a little bit kind of thing in the film. She's getting bullied, you know, you've got the jealous kind of secondary kind of cheerleader that kind of like is obviously racist and stuff like, you know, special treatment, you know, why is she getting number one, why is she getting captain, that kind of bullshit. And you've got a racist cop, a racist mom, and of course this falls into the kind of the main plot points later on during the kind of the second and third act of the film. Help this daughter through this tough time, and he's there on the bus, he's there helping with a fight sequence kind of thing, and he's having a bonding connection moment with the daughter where he should be having a fucking connection with his son. Why is this in the film? I do not understand. Why are we in the last finale movie having brand new two characters, so much so it's taken so much screen time, and why is the IP man connecting so much with this daughter character and saying, oh, you remind me of my son, or you remind me of this, and maybe he's learning a lesson, maybe he's taking these ideas and going back home. But the son isn't. The son is still back home pissed off and angry. Granted, sure, he's doing this to kind of win, you know, the grandmaster's kind of, you know, approval so he can get his son to the school. There's probably some sort of low-key motivations, and you can see some of his kind of bonding within the daughter and himself, and he kind of helps her understand where his father's coming from and where he comes from, and he's the nice kind of middle ground, non-aggressive kind of, you know, third party in that sense. And that's fine. It's not a bad kind of mid-storyline, but it doesn't really go anywhere massively. It kind of drops off during halfway through the movie. I thought there might be a sequence later on where the daughter gets a comeback to the person who ratted her out. Maybe she has a full-on sequence, doing a cheerleader sequence, and then she kind of kicks some ass. I thought there might be a kind of conclusion or resolution to that, to her arc of the film, in learning Wing Chun and kind of, you know, accepting, you know, the middle ground of both her heritage and the kind of her future. She can still be a cheerleader, but she can still be a badass. But they don't explore that. That kind of gets dropped for the kind of military-based aspect of the film, which takes up most of the film, and it's so overwhelming, it's so overblown stuff. Finale movie, and he is a character that is practically serving other characters' kind of purpose in the film. He comes in, he introduces the character, and it's their storyline now. It's rinse and repeat throughout the entire film. You've got the Western Grandmaster and his daughter. You've got this overblown military base angle. You know, Scott Ankins plays this kind of over-the-top, kind of eccentric military commander, whatever kind of character he is, general kind of thing. And he doesn't like Wing Chun. He doesn't like those kind of, you know, those teachings, those values. He thinks it's terrible. It doesn't belong in the military. It doesn't belong in action. And he has his ways. He has his kind of point of views, and he's very determined, very strong on that. And he's also completely racist at the same time. And it just takes up so much, and it's not welcome. It's my least favorite aspect of the entire film, and it's so. It doesn't really offer that much apart from a couple of mini fight sequences and a kind of really cheesy villain. But even the villain aspect to him is just so kind of, you know, cringe in a sense. A lot of the aspects to this is cringe. By the way, where's the IP man? Is he around the film? Oh, there, he's in the background somewhere. It just feels so weird. It's such a disconnect with the main character, with the main story, with the main potential of the storyline. And even the storylines it doesn't even fall through with them. It drops them halfway through the film. And it just comes down to the point of, what is this movie offering? What is it adding to the franchise? When you have a sequel, what is it expanding? What is it exploring? A character, a theme, an idea? You know, IP Man 3, you know, finished its storyline with the wife and that kind of idea and his connection with Wing Chun and the supporting cast around that. The fourth movie doesn't have a purpose. And I don't want to sound over harsh, I don't want to sound too mean, and maybe I'm blowing it out of proportion. Maybe some people really love this movie. Maybe people think this is the best one out of the entire four. I'm saying as a story continuation of a four-part movie, as a kind of concluding chapter, as a kind of fight movie, a Hong Kong fight movie, you know, it fails on a lot of aspects to this. It is a straight up disappointing, you know, lackluster, and frankly fills no purpose to the franchise. It just feels like a money-making, long-last attempt to make some money at the box office while this film is still on people's minds. That's what it feels like. Now, one of the biggest things I don't like about this film is one specific aspect, the Bruce Lee aspect to it. Now, you know, you can say this is a nice little nostalgic nod. You can say this, oh, it's a little callback kind of thing to Bruce Lee, because obviously he has a connection with the IP man. These cameos within 2 and 3 were nice. They were just nice little nods. Hey, him as a kid, him as a teenager. Bookends of the film. They weren't part of the film. This one feels a part of the film, and they make it an important part of it. He's the whole reason he goes there, because he gets a free ticket to go and see his student Bruce Lee doing a tournament and kind of get to know him and his kind of what he's doing, kind of his life. That's fine. I don't mind that. But the fact the film takes about 15 to nearly 20 minutes to do a full-on fight sequence with a fake Bruce Lee is just straight up bad taste for me. There was a thing back in the 70s called the Bruce Lee exploitation, which after he died, they were making sequels and doing lookalikes and clones and all sorts of movies around Bruce Lee, because they were struggling to find stars that were like Bruce Lee. His charisma, his fighting, his kind of talents were very hard to replace. Obviously, Jackie and Jet Li kind of filled those gaps, and obviously Donnie Yen filled those gaps later on during the kind of the evolution of Hong Kong cinema. Now, this film is dangerously on that level of a Bruce Lee exploitation. I think it straight up is exploitation, and it's in bad taste. The fight sequence in the film is really disconnected because, one, it is not Bruce Lee, it is a lookalike doing the same mannerisms, the same fight sequence. It's not particularly a great fight sequence anyway, if I'm being absolutely honest. I think it's very staged, I think it's very overblown, and two, I think it overstays its welcome. Three, it takes away from the storyline. This is the finale of the IP Man franchise, and you're spending 15 to 20 minutes on scenes and on a fight sequence that isn't even the character, isn't even the person in real life. Just another example of overblowing, overstretching, overfilling this movie with so many kind of characters and supporting characters and plot lines and overstayed welcome in this film, which it doesn't feel like an actual film. It feels like we had Donnie Yen for, 30 days or something, where we need to use his scenes quickly, fill in the rest of it with other hammy characters, hammy stuff, hammy this, do a couple of fights here and there. Hey, look, we have a film, and it makes money. That's what it feels like. It doesn't feel like a passion project anymore. It feels like an excuse to get this in cinemas, to make some money, and move on. IP Man 4, the finale, is such a disconnect to the other three movies. I don't see it really part of the collection. The only reason I've got it is because it's part of my box set. It's something that I might kind of watch now and again if I'm in the mood. If I'm going to watch the franchise, I'll watch 1 to 3, and I might see this on, I might not. I might skip it. I might check out a couple of scenes. I might check out, a moment of dialogue here and there, kind of thing. And I think it's such a shame, such a disappointment to a conclusion chapter, and I think it is worse than Master of Z. I think it definitely is a worse offender. Definitely not the worst Hong Kong movie out there, and I think this definitely is better than a lot of other ones I've seen out there for sure. But the more I think about it, the more I kind of, think on the idea of what the kind of legacy of this character is and what the point of the film is and why it tries to exist. I just don't like it more and more. And it's a damn shame. It's a real shame this film is the way I think it is. So there you go, guys. It's been my IP Man franchise overview. Hope you enjoyed watching this little mini series of reviews. I hope you enjoyed watching my reviews from 1 to 4 and the spin-off. What are your thoughts and opinions? Please comment down below. Join the discussion. Is it your favourite one? Is it the worst one? What aspects do you like? What don't you like? Add to the conversation. I'm very curious to have a debate with these movies and to kind of see what people thought and see what people got out of these kind of last 2 movies of the franchise. And now we go from the grandmaster to the student we have is Bruce Lee, which will be my next kind of series, which I'll be exploring all of his movies and my first honest impressions on all of them and seeing if he stacks up to the hype of Bruce Lee. So until next time, guys, Amphlett Reviews, signing out.